The red tractor sat in our barn like a sleeping giant, its metal surface gleaming despite years of dust and neglect. I was 12 when Dad first caught me staring at it through the wooden slats, my small hands gripping the rough planks as I dreamed of climbing into that weathered seat. "This tractor will never be yours, boy," he said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of disappointment. His boots echoed against the concrete floor as he approached, and I could smell the mixture of motor oil and tobacco that always clung to his clothes. The afternoon light streamed through the gaps in the barn walls, casting long shadows across the machine that had become my obsession. I stepped back, knowing better than to argue, but my eyes remained fixed on the John Deere's faded green paint and the way the sunlight caught the chrome details. Dad had inherited it from Grandpa along with the farm, but something had changed after Grandpa's funeral. The tractor became off-limits, a monument to better times that we weren't allowed to disturb. "Why not, Dad?" I finally whispered, my voice barely audible above the rustle of hay in the loft above us. He paused, his weathered hand running along the tractor's hood with surprising gentleness. For a moment, I thought I saw something soften in his expression, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Because some things are meant to stay buried," he said, turning away. "Now get back to your chores." As he walked toward the barn door, I noticed how his shoulders seemed to carry more weight than usual, and I wondered what secrets lay hidden beneath that green and yellow paint. 3 months later, Dad was gone. The heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning while he was fixing the fence by the old oak tree. I found him there, his tools scattered in the grass, looking almost peaceful despite everything. Mom said he'd been carrying too much stress, working too hard to keep the farm afloat in these difficult times. The funeral was small, just like Dad would have wanted. Neighbors came by with casseroles and condolences, their voices hushed as they spoke about the man who'd been a pillar of our small farming community. But as the days passed and the visitors stopped coming, I found myself drawn back to that barn, back to the tractor that had become a symbol of everything I couldn't understand about my father. Standing there in the dusty silence, I realized that the weight of the farm now rested on my 15-year-old shoulders. Mom tried to be strong, but I could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes as she pored over bills at the kitchen table each night. The bank statements scattered across the surface told a story of mounting debt and dwindling options. "We might have to sell," she said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt something fierce and protective rise up in my chest. That night, I lay in bed listening to the wind howl across the fields, thinking about Grandpa's stories of this land, of the generations who'd worked this soil. Somewhere in the darkness, that red tractor waited, holding secrets I was determined to uncover. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I started with Dad's bedroom, moving carefully through his things while Mom was in town buying groceries. His closet smelled like him, that mixture of old spice and hard work that I'd known all my life. I searched through pockets, drawers, and boxes, looking for anything that might explain his strange relationship with the tractor. In his desk drawer, I found bank statements that made my stomach clench. We owed more than I'd imagined, and the final notices were starting to pile up. But buried beneath the bills, I discovered something else. A faded photograph of Dad as a young man, standing beside the very same tractor with a smile I'd never seen on his face. He looked different then, younger, obviously, but also happier, more carefree. His arm was draped casually over the tractor's hood, and in the background, I could see Grandpa watching with obvious pride. Whatever had changed between that moment and my childhood had cut deep, leaving scars that Dad had carried to his grave. The photograph was dated 1985, just 2 years before I was born. On the back, in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting, were the words, "Tommy's first harvest. The land remembers." I studied those words for a long time, trying to decode their meaning. The land remembers what? And why had Dad never wanted me to be part of that memory? As I heard Mom's car in the driveway, I quickly returned everything to its place, but I kept the photograph. That night, I sat by my window, staring out at the barn and wondering what other secrets were hidden in its shadows. The tractor seemed to be calling to me, and I knew I couldn't ignore it much longer. The next Saturday, with Mom visiting her sister in the next county, I finally worked up the courage to really examine the tractor. The barn felt different without Dad's presence, less forbidden, but somehow more mysterious. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the high windows, and every creak of the old building seemed amplified in the silence. I ran my hands along the tractor's surface, feeling the history embedded in every dent and scratch. The seat was cracked leather, worn smooth by decades of use, and the steering wheel bore the patina of countless hands. But it was the small details that caught my attention: a St. Christopher medal hanging from the mirror, a coffee cup holder fashioned from bent wire, and most intriguingly, a small metal box bolted to the floor beneath the driver's seat. The box was locked, but the metal was old and the screws had loosened over time. Using Dad's tools from his workbench, I carefully removed it from its mounting. It was heavier than I expected, and something rattled inside when I shook it gently. Back in the house, I worked at the lock with a bent paperclip, my heart racing with anticipation and guilt. What if Dad had meant for these secrets to stay buried? But my curiosity was stronger than my conscience, and after 20 minutes of careful manipulation, I heard the satisfying click of the mechanism giving way. Inside the box, I found 3 items that would change my understanding of everything: a set of keys, a deed to a piece of property I'd never heard of, and a letter addressed to me in Dad's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter, knowing that whatever it contained would explain the mystery that had haunted our family for years. "Son," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found what I hoped you'd never have to find. I've been a coward keeping this from you, but some mistakes feel too big to undo." I sat on my bed, the afternoon light fading outside my window as Dad's words transported me to a past I'd never known existed. "The summer before you were born, I made a decision that cost us everything. Your grandfather had discovered oil on the back 40, not much, but enough to secure our future. He wanted to drill, to finally give our family the financial stability we'd always needed. But I was young and stupid, and I thought I knew better." My hands shook as I continued reading. The story that unfolded was one of pride, stubbornness, and a single choice that had rippled through decades. I convinced him to sell the mineral rights instead of drilling ourselves. A company offered us quick cash, and I thought we could invest it better. I lost it all in bad investments within 2 years. The oil that could have saved our farm made strangers rich while we struggled to pay our bills. The weight of this revelation settled on my chest like a stone. All those years of Dad's bitterness, his refusal to let me near the tractor that represented his greatest failure, suddenly made sense. The tractor was his pride, son. Every time I looked at it, I saw his disappointment in me. I couldn't bear the thought of you facing the same burden, so I kept you away. But you're stronger than I was, and maybe you can find a way to right my wrong." The letter continued with details about the property deed. Apparently, Grandpa had kept a small parcel of land that still belonged to our family, land that had never been surveyed for oil. As I folded the letter, I realized that Dad's final gift to me wasn't just the truth, but a chance at redemption. The property deed was for 23 acres of seemingly worthless scrubland about 5 miles east of our farm. According to the faded document, Grandpa had purchased it in 1962 for back taxes, intending to use it for grazing cattle, But as I studied the hand-drawn map on the back of the deed, I realized why this land might be significant. It sat directly adjacent to the area where the oil company had been drilling for the past 30 years. If Grandpa's geological instincts were correct, there was a good chance that the oil vein extended onto our forgotten property. Early Monday morning, I convinced Mom to let me borrow the pickup truck, claiming I needed to check on some fencing for a neighbor. The lie sat heavy in my stomach, but I wasn't ready to raise her hopes with theories that might prove worthless. The drive to the property took me through winding back roads I'd never explored, past farms that looked as struggling as ours. When I finally found the rusted metal stakes that marked our boundary, my heart sank. The land looked like nothing special, just rolling hills covered in scrub brush and the occasional oak tree. But as I walked the property, following the creek that meandered through its center, I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. On the far eastern edge, where our land met the oil company's active drilling site, the ground showed subtle signs of seepage, dark stains in the rocky soil that caught the morning light differently than the surrounding earth. I knelt down and touched the earth, bringing my fingers to my nose. The faint smell of petroleum was unmistakable. Standing there in that forgotten field, I felt the weight of 3 generations pressing down on me. Grandpa's lost opportunity, Dad's devastating mistake, and now my chance to set things right. But first, I needed to get that tractor running. The keys from the metal box fit perfectly into the tractor's ignition, but when I turned them, nothing happened. The engine was as silent as it had been for years, and I realized that bringing this machine back to life would require more than just hope and determination. I spent the next 3 days learning everything I could about the old John Deere. Mum found me hunched over repair manuals at the kitchen table, grease under my fingernails, and parts catalogs spread across every surface. "What are you planning, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and concern. "I'm going to fix Dad's tractor," I said simply, not ready to share the full scope of what I'd discovered. She was quiet for a long moment, then placed her hand on my shoulder. "He always said you had more sense than he did at your age. Maybe it's time that old machine had a purpose again." The first challenge was the fuel system. Years of sitting idle had gummed up the carburetor and fuel lines, requiring a complete cleaning and rebuild. I drained the old fuel, flushing the tank with fresh gasoline and carburetor cleaner until it ran clear. The battery was long dead, corroded terminals telling the story of neglect. A trip to town with my saved-up allowance money got me a replacement, along with new spark plugs and filters. But it was the hydraulic system that proved most challenging. The seals had dried out and cracked, causing the lift arms to droop uselessly. This repair required parts I couldn't afford and skills I didn't possess. That's when I remembered old Pete Morrison, Dad's friend who ran the implement repair shop in town. If anyone could help me bring this tractor back to life, it would be Pete. Pete Morrison was working under the hood of a combine harvester when I found him, his gray hair sticking out from beneath a faded baseball cap. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and I saw recognition dawn in his weathered eyes. "Tommy's boy," he said, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "Heard about your dad. Hell of a thing, losing him so young." I nodded, still not comfortable with the sympathy that followed me everywhere these days. "Mr. Morrison, I need help fixing Dad's old tractor, the John Deere that's been sitting in our barn." His expression shifted, and I saw something like surprise cross his features. "That tractor? Your dad swore he'd never let that machine run again. What changed?" "Dad's gone," I said simply, "and some things need to be fixed." Pete studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your grandfather was my best friend, boy. That tractor meant everything to him, and breaking it meant everything to your father. If you're serious about bringing it back, I'll help you." Over the next 2 weeks, Pete became my teacher and partner in resurrection. He showed me how to rebuild the hydraulic cylinders, how to adjust the timing, and how to read the subtle signs that indicated whether an old engine was healthy or dying. "Machines have souls," he told me one afternoon as we worked on the transmission. "This one's been sleeping, but it remembers what it was built for." The day we finally got her running was magical. The engine coughed and sputtered at first, then settled into a steady rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the barn. Pete grinned and slapped me on the back. "She's ready for work, son. Question is, what kind of work do you have in mind?" It was time to tell someone about the land, about the oil, and about the plan that had been forming in my mind. Pete listened to my story without interruption, his expression growing more serious as I described the hidden property, the oil seepage, and Dad's letter. When I finished, he leaned back against his workbench and let out a low whistle. "That's a hell of a thing, boy. Your grandfather always suspected there was more oil on his land than what the company found. But suspecting and proving are two different things." "How do we prove it?" I asked. "Well, first thing you need is a proper geological survey. That costs money. Money I'm guessing you don't have." He paused, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "But I might know someone who'd be interested in a partnership." Pete's cousin, Maria Santos, was a petroleum geologist who'd returned to the area after years working for big oil companies in Texas. She'd been looking for opportunities to start her own small operation, focusing on properties that the major companies had overlooked. We met her at the diner in town the following Saturday. Maria was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and an energy that reminded me of Mom when she was determined about something. 23 acres isn't much," she said, studying the property deed and the geological survey maps Pete had brought. "But if your grandfather's instincts were right, and if the seepage you found is genuine, it could be enough to make a difference." She explained that she could arrange for core samples to be taken, but it would require a partnership agreement. If oil was found, she would handle the drilling and extraction in exchange for 60% of the profits. 40% of something is better than 100% of nothing, Pete said quietly. I thought about Dad's letter, about his regret over letting strangers profit from our family's resources. This felt different. Maria wasn't a stranger looking to exploit us, but a potential partner who understood what this land meant to our family's survival. That evening, I made my decision. The contract took 2 weeks to finalize, with Mum's signature required since I was still a minor. When I finally told her about the hidden property and the potential for oil, she sat in stunned silence for several minutes. "Your father never mentioned any of this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was ashamed," I explained, showing her Dad's letter, "but I think he wanted us to have a chance to fix what went wrong." The geological survey began in early October, just as the leaves were starting to turn. Maria brought in a small crew with a drilling rig, and I spent every free moment at the property watching as they extracted core samples from strategic locations across our acreage. The tractor proved invaluable for clearing access roads and moving equipment. Each morning I would drive it the 5 miles to the property, feeling Dad's presence in the vibration of the engine and the familiar weight of the steering wheel in my hands. "Your boy's got a good head on his shoulders," Maria told Mom one evening when she stopped by to give us an update. "He understands this land in a way that takes most people decades to develop." The waiting was the hardest part. Each core sample had to be analyzed, catalogued, and compared to existing geological data from the surrounding area. Maria explained that oil deposits were tricky. Sometimes a productive well could be just yards away from dry hole, separated by underground rock formations that petroleum couldn't penetrate. But 3 weeks into the survey, she called with news that made my hands shake as I answered the phone. "We found it," she said simply. "It's not huge, but it's definitely there." "Looks like your grandfather knew what he was talking about," The first successful oil well on our property came online on a cold November morning, exactly 1 year after Dad's death. I stood beside the small pumping unit, watching as the dark liquid flowed through pipes toward the storage tank, and felt a connection to something larger than myself. Mom cried when she saw the first royalty check. It wasn't enough to make us rich, but it was enough to pay off the farm's debts and secure our future. More importantly, it validated Grandpa's instincts and offered a kind of redemption for Dad's mistake. The tractor had played a crucial role in the entire operation, from clearing access roads to hauling equipment. Pete had helped me retrofit it with a small trailer hitch and hydraulic connections that made it surprisingly versatile for industrial work. "That machine was built for this," he told me one afternoon as we watched the pumping unit work. "Your grandfather chose well when he bought it. Built to last, built for real work." As winter approached, I found myself spending more time in the barn, maintaining the tractor and thinking about the future. The oil revenue would continue for years, maybe decades, but I was already thinking beyond that immediate security. Maria had mentioned that other small landowners in the area might have similar opportunities if someone could provide the geological expertise and equipment access they needed. A partnership between her knowledge and our resources, including the tractor that had become central to our operations, could create something lasting. I was 17 now, still technically too young to make major business decisions, but old enough to understand that opportunities like this didn't come along often. The land that Dad had thought was worthless might become the foundation for something bigger than any of us had imagined. The tractor sat in the barn, no longer a monument to failure, but a tool ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Spring brought new possibilities and old memories. As I worked the fields around our house, preparing for another growing season, I found myself thinking about Dad and the weight he'd carried all those years. The success of the oil well had lifted that burden from our family, but it had also taught me something important about the nature of mistakes and redemption. The local newspaper ran a story about our miracle oil discovery, painting it as a feel-good tale of perseverance and luck. They interviewed Mom and me, and even included a photo of the tractor that had made so much of the work possible. But what the newspaper couldn't capture was the deeper story, how a 15-year-old boy's curiosity had uncovered decades of buried pain and transformed it into hope. Other farmers began approaching us, asking about the geological surveys and whether their land might hold similar secrets. Maria had been right about the broader opportunities in the area, and by summer we had formed a small cooperative that provided geological consulting and equipment sharing for family farms within a 50-mile radius. The red tractor became the symbol of this operation, traveling from farm to farm, hauling drilling equipment and helping clear access roads. Every time I fired up that engine, I felt connected to 3 generations of my family: Grandpa's wisdom, Dad's struggles, and my own determination to build something better. Pete helped me train other young farmers to operate and maintain the equipment, passing on the skills that had been nearly lost in our rush toward industrial agriculture. There was something deeply satisfying about watching city kids learn to read the subtle signs of a healthy engine or the proper technique for hydraulic repair. One evening, as I sat on the tractor watching the sunset paint the sky above our property, I realized that Dad had been wrong about one thing. The tractor wasn't a burden to be avoided. It was a tool for building the future he'd wanted for us, but had been too afraid to pursue. 5 years later, I stood in the same barn where this journey had begun, but everything had changed. The red tractor gleamed with fresh paint and new hydraulic lines, maintained with the care of someone who understood its true value. Around it sat the equipment of our small but thriving geological consulting business: core drilling rigs, sample analysis tools, and the modern technology that had grown from that first tentative exploration of forgotten land. Mom had remarried, a good man who understood the importance of the land to our family and had embraced the work we were building together. The farm was profitable again, a combination of traditional agriculture and the steady income from our oil wells and consulting services. The cooperative we'd started had grown to include 37 family farms, and together we'd discovered productive oil deposits on 6 different properties. More importantly, we'd created a network of support that helped smaller operations compete with industrial agriculture and maintain their independence. I kept Dad's letter in my wallet, worn soft from handling, but still legible. Sometimes I would read it before making important decisions, remembering his courage in admitting his mistakes and his faith that I could succeed where he had failed. The tractor had traveled thousands of miles over the past 5 years, but it always returned to our barn, to the place where secrets had been buried and dreams had been reborn. When people asked me about the success of our business, I would tell them it started with curiosity about a machine my father had forbidden me to touch. Pete often joined me in the barn these days, his hair completely grey now, but his hands still sure and steady as he worked on the equipment that had become his life's passion. "Your grandfather would be proud," he told me one afternoon as we finished rebuilding a hydraulic pump. He always said the land would provide if we were smart enough to listen. As the sun set on another day, I climbed into the tractor's seat and started the engine, listening to the steady rumble that had become the soundtrack of my adult life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to prove that sometimes the things we're forbidden to touch are exactly what we need to save ourselves. The tractor that was never supposed to be mine had become the foundation of everything I'd built and everything I hope to build in the years to come. Thank you for listening to this story of perseverance, family, and the power of curiosity to overcome even the deepest secrets. I hope it reminded you that sometimes our greatest challenges contain the seeds of our greatest triumphs. Please let me know in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. I love hearing from listeners around the globe. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel for more tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Until next time, keep searching for the keys that unlock your own hidden possibilities.